Now we've already seen how we can assign keyboard shortcuts as triggers for your macros, and that sort of works when you only have a couple of macros. If you have a lot of macros, it becomes quite difficult to actually remember all the keyboard shortcuts, and therefore they aren't very useful. Instead of using keyboard shortcuts, we could use a button on the sheet. What I mean by a button on the sheet is to take your actual worksheet and place a button here that you can click that will trigger your macro. That way, it's a visual thing, you're clicking on it, and you're not having to remember all the keyboard shortcuts. Now, if we take the scenarios.xlsm file, so this one contains macros, and have a look at the macros list, you'll see that in the current workbook, there are 6 macros. Now, each of these macros actually change you from one scenario to another, and the name of the macro sort of gives you a clue. We've got bad apple, bad banana, bad pear, good apples, good bananas, good pear. So each of these actually insert the values from that scenario. So what we're going to do is not actually run any of those, but add 6 buttons that will then trigger each of those macros. So to add your first button, we need the developer ribbon, which if we're dealing with macros, you will have activated. We then need to insert a button, and that's done from this little insert option here, form controls, and the top left-hand one is button. And when I click, that activates the button, and I now have a sort of drawing crosshair, and I just click and drag to draw a rectangle. The minute I let go of the mouse, the button is created, and I'm given the assign macro dialog box. Well, I'd like it to run the bad apples, please, and OK. My button then appears. Now the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of the text button 1 simply by deleting and then typing in bad apple so that I remember which macro it's running. Now the button at the moment is just an object and can be resized, bigger, smaller. The minute you click away, however, the button is then activated as a clickable button, and what you'll find when your mouse goes back over the top is it turns into a pointy finger, suggesting that you can click. And when I click, it then runs the bad apple macro and places the bad apple figures in, and you'll see the apple figures have all dropped down very low. So that's inserting a button and assigning it to a macro. Let's do the second. So it's insert button. I'll place it here next to the bad apple. And let's make that show the good apple figures. Okay. So again, editing the text on the button. Now this can be done afterwards, but if you do it at the time of creation, it is a little easier. And this is going to be good apple. Again, I can click away and that activates my button so that when I click, it puts the good apple figures in. So you can then click between the two and you can see each click is it's running the macro behind that button. So we've got bad apple, good apple. Now my 2 buttons aren't the same size. Now we can get around that to some degree by actually taking our first button and copying and pasting it. Now you can't click on a button to select it because that runs the macro. You have to right click and you can see that's now selected the handles. If I then copy and click away and then paste, I get a second button that's exactly the same size and dimensions as the first one. So it's a good way of getting consistent buttons. And in fact, we could paste it again, move that to there, paste it again, move that to there, and paste it again, and move that to there. So that creates me the 6 buttons that I'm after, but obviously each one now needs reassigned to the correct macro and the label changing. So let's do the one that's activated here. And let's change this to good banana. Let's click away and then right click to get the assign macro option. So I can now choose assign macro and have good banana run. This one, we need to assign the macro and have bad banana run. But I also need to change the text while I'm here. Otherwise, I won't know what it does. And then these 2, right click, assign macro, bad pear, change the text. And this one, assign macro, good pear, and change the text. Now we will subsequently look at a few bits of formatting that you can do with your buttons, including aligning them, but for the moment, they function. So you create the button, you draw the button, you assign a macro to it, you change the text on it so that people know why they're clicking it. So you've got good pear, bad pear. So each click runs the macro that is assigned to that button. Bad bananas, good bananas. Bad apples, good apples. Now we can assign any macro to any button. If we look at the customviews.xlsm file, we can use a macro in here that's already created for us. We have a look at the macro list. The macros here are to view different views. Well, let's add some buttons to run those macros. Insert, button. That's going to show us the CEO. Okay, and we'll change the label. Nobody knows what button 1 does. CEO, click away to activate, click to run, and then in CEO view. Now, because the CEO view includes hidden rows and columns, the actual button that says CEO is now also hidden. So let's add another button about here and assign that to the whole view. And again, don't forget to change what it says. Whole view, click away, and click to run. So now I'm back in whole view. It looks like the whole view button has disappeared, but actually it's just down here because we placed it below the total row. So now these two clever buttons runs the macro to CEO view. CEO view actually hides the columns and rows that the button is in and brings the whole view button higher up the screen, therefore visible, and we can click to go back. So those two buttons actually are quite clever and work well together. So we can assign macros to buttons. The best macros to assign to buttons are the macros that really only make sense within that particular worksheet. Therefore, the button within the sheet is the best way to call them.